Hi there, and welcome to episode... I don't actually know. Oh, I really don't know this time. I'm not even making that up. I don't know what that is, but it's some episode of the Fat Doctor podcast. I'm coming up to 40, I know that, but not there yet. I am going to talk today about BMI, which I don't tend to talk about that often because I'm so over BMI. I don't know about you, but I'm over it. I'm totally over it. But a few days ago at the time of recording, so yeah, a few days ago now, an incredible Olympic athlete and women's rugby player, Ilona Maher, I believe is how you say her name, made a video on TikTok because some prat thought they could weight shame her, and sort of went, I bet her BMI is 30%. I love the fact that they said 30% as well. Like, they don't even know that BMI is not a percentage. But yeah, basically she did this kind of fantastic clapback where she was like, yeah, actually, I mean, it's 29.3, but yes, it is 30. And she went on to say a lot of things about BMI and has been applauded, rightly so, I think. Well done for saying something, because most athletes, most famous people don't. Loads of people, loads of news outlets, I would say around the world, actually picked up on this and have been running with it. And CNN wrote on Friday, August the 2nd, Rugby Olympic medallist Ilona Maher is taking on BMI and winning. Do you know, that kind of pissed me off because I was like, a lot of us have been taking on BMI for quite some time and we have not been winning. But fair enough. If she's doing it, she's doing it. Good for her. She's not fat, as we all know. She's not fat. She's an Olympic athlete. But she has a BMI of almost 30. And she says a whole bunch of stuff. And she says in the video, I think you were trying to roast me, but this is actually fact. I do have a BMI of 30, well, 29.3 to be more exact. I'm considered overweight, but alas, I'm going to the Olympics and you're not. That's what she said. At the end of the video. Anyway, CNN goes on to talk about the problem with BMI. Oh, finally, people are talking about the problem with BMI. As currently defined, a BMI between 18.5 and 24.9 is a healthy weight. Critics say the term BMI has become a societal judgment by lumping individuals into arbitrary categories that perpetuate misconceptions about body weight. Huh? Even with all the backlash against fat shaming, weight stigma against the seriously overweight or those who have obesity remains deeply rooted. You know, it's really interesting that CNN are talking about weight stigma against the seriously overweight or those who have obesity. So they're using first-person language and making obesity a pathology, as they so love to do. And seriously overweight, not just a little overweight, that's okay, but seriously overweight. Fuck you, CNN. Anyway, a BMI measurement can be flat wrong in some case. Thomas Wadden, a professor of psychology at the Perelman School of Medicine in the University of Pennsylvania. Listen to this. Consider a young woman who is 5'5" and 150 pounds. She'd be on the cusp of being overweight. But she may be incredibly muscular. And she may have most of her weight in her lower body, where it is not as damaging to her health as weight in the upper body. She could easily say, I am in perfectly good health. Should just take your BMI of 25 and shove it. Huh. Suppose she could. What if she was 5'5" and weighed 250 pounds though? Could she say it then? Like what? Like, where's your cutoff? Professor... What was it? Oh, it wasn't Professor. Thomas Wadden. Oh, he's a professor. Professor Wadden. Where's your cutoff? You will not be surprised to hear that this person works in the field of eating disorders. Of course, they don't know what they're talking about. 5'5" and 150 pounds. That's okay. That's fine. But 250 pounds, would you say the same thing? And what if she wasn't muscular? What if she was just 150 pounds and had no muscle mass at all? Like, just didn't work out. Would that be okay? What if her fat was around her belly and not in her lower body? Would that be okay? It's interesting, isn't it? Like, oh, 25 is a bit low for some people, but only if you're a little bit overweight, not if you're seriously overweight, or the big O word. Sorry, no, that you're living with the O word, because that's what we are now, living with it. So Ilona says, I'm 5'10" and 200 pounds, and I have about, and this is an estimate, but about 170 pounds of lean mass on me. And so she's talking about her muscle mass compared to her fat mass, which unsurprisingly her fat mass is about 15%. That would be what we would expect from an Olympic athlete. That's not normal for most human beings, right? She is a professional athlete. She spends her life exercising, playing rugby. So, she's supposed to be 15% body fat. That's not normal for most individuals. That BMI doesn't really tell you what I can do, how fit I am. It's just a couple of numbers put together. It doesn't tell you how much muscle I have or anything like that. All of this is true. It doesn't. But also I would argue it doesn't matter. It does if you're an Olympic athlete where people are literally monitoring these things, but it doesn't for everybody else. How fit you are doesn't say anything. Like, what being fit, whatever that means. I mean, so what? If you're an Olympic athlete, being fit's very important, but not everyone else. Doesn't tell you what you can do, and it doesn't say anything about muscle mass, but we've got to stop fixating on muscle mass like it's become the new thing, or we're not allowed to weight shame people, so we will fat shame people and say it's all right if you're heavy, but as long as the heavy is made up of muscle. If your heavy is made up of fat, then that's terrible, because fat doesn't weigh much. So if you've got lots of fat, then oh gosh. So CNN goes on to say there's a movement in the medical profession to move away from crude BMI measurements in clinical practice. Is there? I haven't seen this movement. It's awfully slow. Certainly not Olympic paced. I've not heard of anyone giving up BMI as a measure of whether a person can access certain forms of treatment, investigations, whether or not you're going to get weight shamed, referred for surgery, etc., etc. Fertility treatment. I've not heard of any movement whatsoever. I do know that in 2023, the American Medical Association adopted a new policy. It wasn't a new policy. They just said, yeah, BMI is not great. Maybe we should do other things instead. But they haven't actually adopted a policy or new guidelines at all. They just kind of went, meh. And they did that so the makers of Wegovy could ask insurance companies to prescribe their drug to people with a BMI of under 35 or under 30, whatever it was. Stop using BMI, folks, and that way we can sell more of our drugs. That's all it was. It has nothing to do with improving the life and care and dignity and respect of fat individuals. Don't think for 1 second the American Medical Association cares about that. So I wanted to talk about BMI in terms of what it is and what it isn't. What it is a racist tool of oppression. I say that confidently and without any remorse. It is racist because it was only ever tested on white European young men. So not just racist, but also misogynistic, sexist, and also ageist, because BMI does change over time, but it was soldiers that were measured primarily, so not helpful at all for most people. It's racist, but the tool of oppression part, now that's very serious. I'm being quite serious. It is a tool of oppression, as I said, because it is used to gatekeep medical services. Sorry, I have to take a drink. It's so hot at the moment. So it is used to gatekeep medical services. As I mentioned, fertility treatment, surgeries, certain investigations. Some doctors simply just say, I'm not even going to start investigating you because I know that we can't do the surgery because you're too fat, so let's not bother. I've heard that being said to people. Now, we're not even going to give you a diagnosis because we know we can't treat it. So we'll just leave it at that. You suffer until you've lost weight. I have had people say to me, my doctor told me to lose 10% of my body weight and not come back until I've done it. So I was like, well, who's going to follow up your condition? I don't understand. Like, who's going to, take care of you? Obviously, they've given you a diagnosis and they're like, no, they won't see me until I've lost my weight. That's beyond negligence, isn't it? I don't even know what the word is for that. That's horrifying, but it's just normal practice nowadays. So it is a tool of oppression. It is a tool of oppression that is used specifically and intentionally to worsen the health outcomes, to intentionally worsen the health outcomes of fat people, of black people and brown people, of disabled people and women, or those assigned female at birth, I should say, so females. because it's completely and utterly inaccurate. First of all, it doesn't apply to those groups of people I have been speaking about because it was never measured on them. And also, BMI is completely and utterly inaccurate. And I think I have explained this on multiple occasions, but I will explain it again. A brief history of the BMI. Once upon a time, a long time ago, there was a eugenicist, a race scientist, someone who believed that certain individuals were superior. And by certain individuals, I mean white men, and certain white men also. He also categorised the types of white men. So those he considered to be lower, also not good enough. There was a superior white race that he strongly believed in. And he wrote a book all about the average man because he believed, oddly enough, that the superior man was the average man, which seems weird to me because surely the superior man is better than the average man. But there you go. What can you do? It wasn't even a sensible theory. He came up with an idea that sort of linked weight with height, and that was about it. And at the time, he wasn't looking at cardiovascular health. He was talking about. He was more interested in things like criminology and what makes a person a criminal and a lower human being. But anyway, his name was Adolphe Quetelet, and he goes down in history as being a eugenicist who came up with this weird calculation that nobody would have heard of had it not been for later events. So that happens, and then we have this history of fat phobia throughout medicine, and you need to read Fearing the Black Body by Sabrina Strings to really understand this. I mean, she really explains it in great detail. But there were loads of doctors and scientists who basically said if you're fat, it's bad for your health. And this was made sort of culminated in the early 20th century when a man named Lewis Israel Dublin and his team at the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company came up literally with the monetary value of a man. He decided, along with his team, how long a person could live and therefore how much he was worth to the insurance companies. Again, I'm not sure if women were included. It was the early 20th century. All I know is the monetary value of a man. Maybe women didn't get insurance because if they died, who cared? But anyway, so there's Lewis Dublin deciding how much a man is worth, literally how much he's worth. And they created these tables of height and weight. And this is what height and weight should look like. And I think it was the ideal weight, the desirable weight, the ideal weight. These tables kept getting redone. And then that was used for decades by all doctors. A life insurance company created tables in order to make money, and doctors used this in order to assess their patients. All right? And then, after that, what happened was a man called Ansel Keys. Now, he really hated fat people. He was involved in the Minnesota semi-starvation experiment. If you haven't heard about that, I've written about it in a blog. And he was part of that experiment where they took a group of healthy young volunteers, all men again, because women didn't count. And they were starved, essentially, intentionally, semi-starved, given only 1,600 calories a day, folks. 1,600. That was a luxury throughout my dieting days, but whatever. They were given 1,600 calories a day for several months, and they all became very unwell. And he was involved in that experiment. And then about 20 years later, my guy comes up with a paper in which he talks about fatness. He really didn't like fat people. And he came up with the body mass index in this particular paper. And he used Quetelet's idea of height and weight and the measurement, the calculation between the two. And he said, you know what, this is as good as all the other options out there. So we're just going to use this. But he said very clearly at the time, that being said, this is for population studies only. We do not use this for individual assessment because that's not the purpose. It's not suitable for that purpose. So we can use it for population studies, and it's okay. He didn't even say it was great. He was like, it's okay, it's fine. So that was in 1972. In 1985, the American Dietary American Dietary Association guidelines for the I can't remember what it's called, but they came out. 1980 was the first lot. 1985 they came out, so the second edition, and were like, look, we're going to take the height and weight tables, which are kind of a pain in the bum. And we're going to turn it into the BMI. So we're just going to translate it into BMI, literally just work it out and translate it into BMI. So Ansel Keys had said, don't use this for individual assessment. The Metropolitan Life Insurance Company had said, we're using this to assess how much a person's life is worth. And somehow the American dietary guidelines decide it's a good idea to use BMI to measure people's health. Sorry. Yeah, that sounds reasonable, doesn't it? That's fine. We shouldn't be worried about that. That shouldn't concern us. All right, fine. They did that, and then they sort of, there wasn't a cut-off at the time. It was just there, 1985. And then by within a decade, the WHO had said, you know what? We're going to make some cut-offs. We're going to have some numbers, and we're going to decide whether or not whether or not people are healthy or not, just by cutting, making some numbers. And they did. And I've talked about this before. They were random arbitrary cut-offs, 25, 30 and 40. 3 magic numbers based on very crap science, to say the least. And that's the end of that. That was at the end of the 20th century. And for the entirety of the 21st century, we have used BMI to assess people's health. And there are multiple problems with that because, A, as I said, it does not include the vast majority of people. It only includes white men. That's problematic in of itself. But it's way beyond that. BMI has been shown to be wholly and utterly inaccurate when it comes to predicting a person's health. So, for example, 50% of people with a quote-unquote unhealthy BMI are healthy, low cardiac risk, no metabolic issues. So you could look at a person and be like, oh, your BMI is high, therefore you are unhealthy and at high risk. But that person isn't. Using any criteria that you want to measure, CRP, blood pressure, cholesterol, HbA1c, I don't know, whatever you want to measure, they're not. 50% of the time. 30% of people with a quote-unquote healthy BMI are unhealthy. In other words, they have abnormal HbA1c, blood pressure, etc., etc. So if 30% of people with a normal BMI are walking around going, hey, I'm healthy when they're not, and 50% of people with a high BMI are going around going, oh, I'm unhealthy when they are, this is not an accurate measure of health by any standard. Completely fucking useless, especially because it is used to prevent people from accessing healthcare. Now, I understand that there are going to be times when a surgeon might say, do you know what? I don't want to do this surgery because the risks outweigh the benefits. Okay, that's a conversation for that surgeon to have with that patient. But the risks cannot be BMI. BMI is not a risk. It is a completely useless, inaccurate measure of health. So that can't be one of the risks. You have to actually have real risks and legitimate concerns to decide whether or not a person is suitable for surgery. Same goes for fertility care. Same goes for everything. You can't just go BMI. BMI what? What does that mean? Nothing, according to the studies. But what really bugs me, apart from the fact that it's completely inaccurate, is how we think we're making progress. Society thinks they're making progress. And this is what really got me about this whole TikTok video and the response. This is no shade towards Ilona, by the way. What she said was great, fine. I have no problem about this. My 2 issues are that, number 1, society is making a really big deal out of this, which is not fair because fat people have been saying this for decades. And now, not even a fat person is not fat by any stretch of the imagination. Like she said, she has no fat. But this attractive white female, and by attractive, I mean by society standard, white female, young, very fit, very athletic, gold, medal winner, says something about BMI and everyone's like, ooh, yes, bravo. Never been said before. It has been said. It has been said time and time again. And The second thing that bugs me is that we will still go to bat for athletes who are wrongly accused of being overweight. You know, all that 5'5", 150 pounds. She's fine. She's just fine. Like, don't pick on her. But we will never go to bat for fat people, especially very fat people. No, then we will shame them. And anyone who dares to say otherwise is considered, you know, what is it that I'm doing? I can't think of the word. I'm something obesity. You're probably all shouting at me right now. This is what happens when you have perimenopause. Can't think of simple words. Anyway, moving on. You know what I'm doing. I'm something. Oh my God. It's going to bug me. You can't say it's okay for some people just because you're pushing the goalpost a little bit, just because you're saying, do you know what, a BMI of 27 is okay, or a BMI of 29 is okay. But once you get to, this is okay, but this isn't. All of you who go, yeah, but surely you can't believe that for people who weigh 600 pounds, because, you know, 600 is this is the number, this is the magic number. That really, really bothers me. BMI is a racist tool of oppression. It has been used to harm fat people since its inception. And prior to BMI, there were the height and weight tables. And prior to that, there were, you know, the Dr. Lulu Hunt Peters. And there was the John Harvey Kellogg's, and there were the eugenicists, and there have always been people, medical professionals, who have used people's weight and their fat to harm them. And you can go back even further in society, as I said. Check out Sabrina String's book, take out Deshaun Harrison's book as well, because it's kind of set in more modern times. And so you've got the long-standing history in Sabrina String's books. You've got the kind of like much more modern history, that a lot of stuff that I know about and can relate to and happened in my lifetime in Deshaun's book. They are so important, these books. And you can see just how fat has been used to harm people, especially black people, because, of course, what society is doing to all fat people, they do the most to black people. You know, whatever harm they're causing fat people, they're causing the most amount of harm to black fat people, because that's the way that, you know, white supremacy and colonialism and racism works. So that really boils my piss. If you're going to start, what was it? Tackling the BMI. Well, I've just got to go back to that article. Rugby Olympic medalist is taking on BMI and winning. If you're going to take on BMI, not Ilona, I'm not saying it's her job. I'm saying if we as a society are going to take on BMI, then we have to, as a society, address the harm, the intentional harm that has been historically and continues to be caused by the use of the BMI within the medical profession. We need to address that harm. We need to talk about the social injustice, not just the unfairness, but the cruelty. People are being denied their basic human rights because of this stupid, unfair, inaccurate, racist tool of oppression. That I've described the history. There's nothing good to be said here. Nothing good whatsoever to be said about the BMI. Like, you can't say one thing apart from, it's easy to calculate, which means nothing. So is, you know, the time of day. It doesn't mean anything. There's nothing good to be said about the BMI. And yet when we talk about it, we're continuing to make excuses. We're still like saying, BMI, it's not okay for like those on the, just sort of on the margins, on the fringes, those who have just kind of peaked into the slightly abnormal, in quotes, range, you know, like those who are just straddling the border. We need to stop criticising them. And if they're Olympic athletes, you know, if they're rugby players, the rugby players everyone always talks about the rugby player. I guess in the States, maybe it's not just rugby, maybe it's like football players, but, you know, any sport where like you have to be quite big, basically, to do your job. Yeah. That's always the one that gets used. Yeah, but they've got high BMIs and they're clearly healthy. Lots of people with high BMIs are healthy. Hey, guess what? Really fat people are healthy. Yeah, I said it. Shocking, isn't it? But really fat people are healthy. And I mean that in every sense of the word. I mean it when it comes to your society's really narrow-minded, pathetic kind of definition of healthy, which is basically blood pressure, cholesterol, and HbA1c. That's basically your three, right? Maybe CRP's been put in there now because we're all about inflammation. But yeah, that's healthy according to society. Now, this is not healthy, but put that to one side. Even if we're using that particular definition of healthy, right? There are fat people who meet that definition. There are thin people who do not meet that definition. And guess what? There are fat people who don't meet that, who aren't healthy and are still perfectly valid and perfectly great. I'm one of those people. I'm fat and I'm diabetic. And guess what? Fuck you. I'm still entitled to the same things that you are. I'm still entitled to the same medical care that you are. I am still entitled to the same fucking human rights as you are. You don't get to argue with me over this. I am. We all are. You do not get to say that I am worth less because I am not only fat, but fat and not quote unquote healthy. Now, I would argue I'm very healthy. Yes, I have diabetes, but you should see my mental health and you should check out my stress levels because they're pretty amazing. I have fantastic, solid relationships, friendships. I have done a lot of work. I have done a lot of deconstruction. I feel good in myself, in my bones. I'm able to move freely. I'm not in any pain. I have a lot of energy. As far as I'm concerned, I'm super healthy. But yeah, sure, I know society will say, oh, you're diabetic. It doesn't count. Once you're diabetic, you don't get to be healthy ever again. But even if that were the case, I am still entitled to the same basic level of care that you are. You do not get to bypass me and be like, oh, I'm worth more because of your HbA1c. No, you don't get to do that. And you don't get to do that because of my BMI. And you don't get to do that because of anything, actually. I know that in society people think they can, but they can't. It's just not, no. It's just not, no. I mean, you might get away with it, sure, but still, you can't. You're just wrong. It's flat out wrong. That's the end of that. So, BMI is a load of shit. We've known this for a very long time. I'm glad some people are talking about it. I wish they would talk about it properly. I wish there'd be a journalist out there who would actually have the courage to write about this properly, rather than reciting and regurgitating the same old shit like they can't use their brains, or they have no journalistic integrity. They have no... Like, I'm sure they went to university to study this stuff. I'm sure that they are supposed to think outside the box and to critically appraise stuff. I'm sure they're supposed to, but they don't. They just write the same old bullshit every single time. Regurgitate. I wish someone would have the courage and the integrity, the moral courage and integrity to write about BMI correctly. But until they do, I'm just going to stop. I'm just going to keep ranting about it here on my little podcast that virtually no one listens to. But that's all good. Maybe one day in the future someone will. I know some of you are listening to it. Don't get me wrong. And I'm grateful for you. I really am. I'll stop ranting. It's because it's too hot. I feel like my summer podcast episodes will be shorter just because I can't bear the heat. But yeah, I know I talk about this all the time. I know some of this is not news to you and I'm repeating myself, but I will continue to repeat myself until it sinks in here in your head and here in your heart. Don't forget, you can watch me on YouTube, folks. Now, you can see my face. You can watch me sweat on YouTube if you're into that sort of thing. But I'm guessing if you're listening to the podcast, you're into podcasts, so you could just carry on listening to me on podcasts. A few spaces have opened up for clients. I guess that happens at the end, sort of in August. So I have a few spaces for clients. If you're interested in working with me one-to-one, you know where to find me, fatdoctor.co.uk. Press contact and get in touch. Or you can email me at contact@fatdoctor.co.uk. Or you can go on my social media and, send me a DM. Or, I don't know, I was going to say pigeon, or snail mail, but you can't do that. Yeah, get in touch if you are interested in working with me one-to-one. Or I tell you what, go to my website and you can learn all about it on my website, fatdoctor.co.uk/consultations. What else? Is anything else new? I'm doing a summer of rest program right now, so I am feeling so rested. It was just the new moon in Leo as well, and I got some really... I feel really good about that. I don't know about you, but I really enjoy the full moon. I'm sorry. Did I say full moon? I meant new moon. I meant new moon in Leo. I very much enjoyed that. So I'm feeling really good. I will be back next week. Still trying to organise some guests to come on, but, you know, that's a lot harder than it sounds, and I'm not going to sweat it. I'm already sweating enough. So... there may be a guest next week. There probably won't be. There will be one eventually. I'll see you next week. Take care, folks. Bye-bye.